All right, thank you guys so much. We are continuing our Seeing Through Gebser series. Today we're on page 256. We are continuing with the previous forms of realization and thought. Today we'll be discussing perspectival thinking a little more. I'm going to try not to be too repetitive on that section. And paradoxical thinking, which I think you guys will be interested in learning about because there's some interesting insights going on there. This is my first Gebser video since the birth of my beautiful daughter. I want to thank you guys so much for the kind comments. It really just means the world to me. It really means a lot that you guys will continue this with me. So thank you so much. Let's get right into it. Last week we did oceanic thinking, which was, I still have it here, that A to B, B to C, C to B, B to A. This is pretty interesting stuff. And I think with that, you could have a far greater understanding of thought, if you will, from 10,000 BC up until the Renaissance. But now we're going to shift into perspectival thinking. Of course, we've already sort of covered this to an extent in the mental structure video in this series, but also in my Kill Rationalism series. Just in case you guys watch my Gebser videos, but not my Kill Rationalism, I am going to have to go through it again, just because that's what this book is about. I'm going to try not to be too repetitive here, so I'll do my best. Okay. So he says, our formulation and description of the concept of perspectivity began with the perspective of Leonardo da Vinci. A detailed discussion of the perspectivation and consequent sectorization of the world that results from it is contained in the second chapter of the present work. Now we have called attention to Leonardo's concept of the visual pyramid. There we have called attention, excuse me. The fundamental symbol of this mode of perception is the triangle, which is largely an expression of the form of our epoch's thinking. When regarded as one surface of a pyramid, this triangle can be vertical, and when seen as the perspectival depth surface, horizontal. Without losing sight of the vertical, let us confine our observations to the horizontal form since it lends itself more readily to a graphic depiction. In this visual triangle, the eyes form the base and complete the synthesis of their simultaneous perception at the perspectival vanishing point. So just in case you haven't seen my Kill Rationalism video, this is where we're getting into the direct connections between perspectivity and rational thought. Of course, as you mentioned, the rational thought, either or, then you develop the third aspect of measuring thought to complete the triangle, complete the synthesis. This is the same pattern inherent in perspectivity. We have one, two, either this, either or. They both have two separate lines of perception, and they are both synthesized at the vanishing point. The vanishing point is the point on the horizon line where all lines converge, and once they converge on that vanishing point, order is conferred on what is seen visually or encompassed by thought. This synthesis is possible because of the trivalent or triadic relationship of the triangle, which not only opens up, but also closes space at the vanishing point. In this process, the points formed by the eye become antinomies in the wake of an increasing intellectualization. And these antinomies meet their opposites at the vanishing point like two statements completed by a third. So I've already explained this. I don't want to bog this down too much. If you haven't seen this, you want me to explain this really in detail, go watch Kill Rationalism Part 2. But again, the triangular pattern inherent in rational thought is mirrored in the triangular pattern inherent in perspectivity. That makes sense when you consider that rationality was discovered from the preceding birth of perspectivity. You would expect to find aspects or characteristics of perspective to be manifest in rational thought, and we find them. This description brings us close to the simplest form of pyramidal thinking, the conceptual pyramid of J. Stenzel. Leisgang makes a case for Plato as being its creator, noting that Plato is also the creator of logical judgment, and thus of logical thinking as such in its rationalistic sense. Leisgang also observes that, here at the source we see the intimate connection between the conceptual pyramid and what we even today consider to be logical thinking as such. The logos is, for Plato, the interconnection of concepts which subordinate and superordinate each other and thus unite in a pyramidal classification system to form a coherent whole. I'll repeat for my philosophy guys out there. The logos is, for Plato, the interconnection of concepts which subordinate and superordinate each other and thus unite in a pyramidal classification system to form a coherent whole. So that is what Plato's logos is. Logos being connected to order, being connected, of course, to rational thought. Excuse me. This pyramidal thinking is the efficient thought form of the mental structure, while perspectival thinking represents its deficient form. Both are extensions of what has been called Plato's method of diaresis. Excuse me, philosophy guys, if I'm mispronouncing this stuff. Diaresis today is generally understood to be conceptual hair splitting, which is to say the deficient aspect of rational thought. Conceptual hair splitting to the point where no one knows anything, everything has to be hyper exact, but you're never going to find it because you're constantly dividing, and no one can confer order on anything because we're so intelligent and so rational that we don't even know what the basic definition of any word means. It's incredible how that works. We come closer to the actual essence and original significance of this method, however, if we observe more carefully the word diaresis itself. The basic verbal form is hairo, H-A-I-R-E-O, meaning to take, while the prefix di means apart. Diaresis is then a taking apart, a separation or severing. So, of course, when someone deconstructs, what are they doing? They're taking the whole and they're taking apart, extracting one point from the whole. They're separating, if you will, one point from the whole, then they're positing it against something else, and they're invoking the third aspect of measuring thought to determine, yes, this makes sense, or no, it doesn't make sense. Rational deconstruction, taking apart. You can see it even in the etymological roots of Plato's diaresis, excuse me. Very interesting. So next time you see something is deconstructed, that's kind of what they're doing. It is, in a word, the method, measuring procedure, capable of separating or disrupting the self-contained circle. The polar constellation is no longer valid. What is valid are the parts which can be made into opposites. So just beautifully put, right? Just beautifully put. I'm sorry I'm drinking so much. I went on a run today, and in my neck of the woods, it was like 95 degrees outside, so I need to compensate. Okay, let's continue. This method permitted Greek man to bring under control the increasingly conscious energy of the soul that threatened to overpower him by its diversity of mythical imagery. He was compelled to direct these images lest he succumb to them. So what happened was, just like all the other deficient aspects of the magical and mythical structure, same thing with rationalism, it gets taken too far. It gets overly quantified. Everything just overwhelms. Same thing with mythical consciousness structure. All these psychic images, whether it be in the form of dreams at night or just daydreams, myth, art, all this stuff, they started to become so overwhelming, and no one could agree on any interpretation, that they simply stopped becoming effective and started rendering themselves deficient. And because that deficient nature led to psychological discontentment and disunity, therefore the rational diaresis, picking apart, was the way of conferring order on these mythical images. Rational thought was born from deficient, well, I shouldn't say born from the deficient mythical. Came about because of the existence of deficient mythical structure. Same thing with integral. It's not necessarily that they have to come out this way. It just often is. So the deficient mythical structure, with all of its overwhelming psychic imagery and all that stuff, just simply engendered in the people who are receiving this imagery discontentment, disunity, disorganization, confusion. And that, of course, gave rise to rational thought, this picking apart, taking the whole and saying, okay, this means that, this means that. The only reason they did that at all is because they wanted to confer order. They needed that. Quantifying tendency of the deficient mythical structure threatened man with psychic fragmentation. Here lies the origin of the Platonic ideas which were able to stabilize and order the increasing masses of psychic manifestations and projections. In a sense, the primal image and its likeness are no longer a polarity, but a duality united in the idea, the third component, the synthesis above both. So the Platonic ideas, the origin of that is Plato desperately trying to confer some sort of order on the overwhelming mythical and psychic imagery that he has been inundated with, and that is driving him off the cliff. The twilight, ambiguous nature of myth had gained ascendance to the extent that the awakening of consciousness revealed its increasing self-manifestation in ever larger quantities of ambivalent and ambiguous images. Greek man was able to escape the ambiguity and its lack of stability by positing parts which could be opposed so that in any given instance each part was unequivocal and unambiguous and directed rather than polar. So you can already see how the rational method is taking place. So this image means this. It cannot mean all these other things, because if we go down that road, we might as well just give up because it's just become too much. It's deficient. This means that. A means A. It cannot be A and B at the same time. You can already see how this is coming. By positing the concept, Greek man reached a judgment, and judgment consists of a connection of ideas grouped together according to the categories of assertion. Since these ideas are posited assertions and not agitated images, then only one of two assertions, one affirming what the other negates, can be correct. My shirt is either blue or it is red. It's blue. It is not blue and red. I guess that's a little different because I could have a blue and red shirt at the same time. But in this example, it's not. It's blue. It's not yellow. It's not green. It's just blue. Very simple. In the imagery of polar, mythical, and symbolic expression, both were possible. The not only but also, that was of course last week's circular oceanic thinking, was valid until Aristotle's premise of tertium non datur annulled its force for 2 millennia in favor of the unambiguous either or. An example of Aristotle's tertium is the statement that a horse is either white or non-white. A third statement or possibility does not exist. The result is the principle of non-contradiction, or antinomy, which no longer admits the possibility of polarity, which I'm pretty sure is transferred into, what is it, the law of the non-excluded middle? It's either one or the other, right? I could be wrong. I don't want to get anything wrong on that, but just go look up the laws of logic. You'll find it. If any two judgments, fixed statements, which I'll remind you is just a connection of ideas grouped together according to the categories of assertion. So if any two judgments, determinations, or partitionings where one affirms what the other denies, only one is true. Abstraction of a concept from an image eliminated the polar possibility. So once the mental structure came about, that eliminated polarity. That's gone. Integral returns that, reactivates that, and we get the powers because of that. This theory of judgment leads to the theory of inference. Aristotle has declared that the syllogism is the fundamental form of all inference and deduction. The conclusion results from two premises, each having a common term. First premise, all men are mortal. Simple. So we have A equals B. All men is A, are mortal. B. Second premise, Socrates is a man. So A. Then we have, C is Socrates, and then man and men, that's A, as we already established. So we have all men are immortal. All men A, I'm sorry, I messed up on that one. All men A are mortal. B. Socrates C is a man. A. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Socrates C is mortal. B. So we have A equals B, C equals A, and C equals B. Very simple. Just very simple. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Socrates is mortal. This is efficient pyramidal thinking, efficient mental rational thinking. Yet this conclusion is convincing only because it is based on a pyramidal pattern of organization. So we're seeing how the triangle, which is so important, and perspectivity is also so crucial in mental rational thought. So this triangle, it's not just a symbol. It is a symbol, but it's deep. You can't just view it as just a symbol. No, it only works because it's a triangle. If it was a circle, it wouldn't work. If it was a rectangle, it wouldn't work. It is a triangle. That's how perspectivity works. It just is. The first two propositions are premises, and the three terms contained in them, mortal, man, Socrates, are called respectively major, middle, and minor terms. Once again, we encounter the expression of trinitary form, opening as well as delimiting the three-dimensional space. And then you could also view it in a different way. I don't know if you can see that this way. Maybe for all you logic lords out there. Yeah, very, very simple, efficient pyramidal thinking. Let's see. Along with Plato and Aristotle, the predominant representatives of pyramidal thinking are Democritus, Epicurus, Philo, the Neoplatonists, Plotinus, and to some extent Augustine. Others are Thomas Aquinas and the Scholastics, later Bacon, Descartes, Kant, Hobbes, and the Encyclopedists and Comte. That's Comte, C-O-M-T-A, not Kant. Well, Kant is in there, but those are two separate people. As well as their followers, the materialists, and present-day scientists who are still unable to accept indeterminacy. But already the works of Bacon show evidence of perspectival thought, the deficient form of pyramidal thinking. So pyramidal thinking is efficient. What I just said. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Socrates is mortal. That's efficient. Perspectival thought. Gebser is going to make the argument that is deficient. Okay. Let us note here only the main characteristics of perspectival thinking. It coincides to a great extent with directed sectorial vision. It fixes the object to be grasped. This is what rationality does. Are we talking ontology? Are we talking ethics? Are we talking Kant's work? Are we talking Heidegger's work? Are we talking my mouse pad? Are we talking a horse? Are we talking my computer? We are sectoring off the limit, so wherever we deploy our limited mode of thought, it can confer a higher degree of clarity in that. It simply cannot take the whole. So we need to limit what we are perceiving to confer a higher degree of clarity over what we are saying. Okay? Very simple. Just like perspectivity. The eye cannot see the entire world. So it makes a compromise and it limits its field of vision, but in turn, a higher degree of clarity and order is conferred. Same thing with rational thought. It fixes the object to be grasped, and two identical lines of vision take in the object as a third item in the same manner that two equations result in a third. Perspectival discursive thinking yields correct results only if it proceeds by narrowing from the general to the particular or to what is to be excluded. So we're taking all this stuff, like 99% of the world, and we're excluding all of that. We're going to focus on one thing. We're talking about economics right now. We're talking about capitalism. Okay, I don't want to talk about capitalism. I want to talk about the quantum of action in science. Okay, that's fine. We'll just turn it somewhere else, right? We can't do both at the same time because they're not going to work. Okay, I don't want to talk about science anymore. I want to talk about anthropology. Okay, fine. We'll turn again. Okay, you guys are getting it. Oh, what's happening? So the lesson there is that we're taking the general, we're deducing a particular. Even in perspective, we're ignoring the general, that is, say, the entire world, and we say, we're looking this way, we're looking this way, we're looking this way. Same thing with rationality, right? Economics, anthropology, science. It must create its own basis, somewhat like the demiurge, without knowing or being able to determine whether this basis actually is or can be valid. The moment the rule is not observed, the moment it becomes impossible to determine what the thought is aimed from the general toward a particular, we find logical errors as in the following syllogism. A man, A, fell into the water. B, we, C, are all men, A. Consequently, we will all fall into the water. We, C, and water, B. So, of course, this is bad logic. Let's try that again. A man fell into the water. We are all men. Consequently, we will all fall into the water. I actually had a very close friend who unfortunately passed away by drowning. So every time I use this example, I just think, oh, that's not good. But we can clearly see the bad logic here. It's just when we're deducing a particular from the general, things are generally pretty good. That's sufficient logic right there. That's why the is-ought-gef, if you watch my Kill Rationalism series, that's one of the big reasons why rationality will not be able to bridge the gap, is because they do a good job in deducing a particular from the general in the realm of quantifiably measurable and consciously known. That is to say, the is, they use that same logic to build from a particular to a general. That's a problem. All right. This example is a clear instance of the reduced validity of perspectival thinking. It is valid only where the conceptual field can be narrowed so as to permit deduction of the particular from the general. In this respect, also, it is similar to perspectival vision. If a single sector is to be perceived, it must be separated from the general field of vision. So that's kind of what I was just talking about. The necessity of this thought form was and is as apparent as its one-sidedness and limitation. A consequence of its one-sidedness is perspectival thinking man's need for recourse to religio, to the ties back to a church-administered religion, and to the extent that he no longer has blind faith, he tries to establish religion by using a mixture of oceanic and perspectival thinking, paradox, which we will discuss later in this video. A consequence of the limitations of discursive perspectival thinking is that it has itself restrictions and in turn must also impose limitations. The result of this spatial restriction is that such thinking both opens space and is confined by it. So this is rationalism 101. Rationality is limited, and when you deploy it in an area where it doesn't belong, it will impose those limitations on the thing that is being considered, That's not necessarily a bad thing if you recognize that this is a deficient tool. But when you persist and insist on deploying this wrong mode of thought, now we got problems. And then what is this part? Because it's, as he said, the result of this spatial restriction, because it's restricted to space. In many ways, it opens up all this spatial phenomenon in whatever it is what we're considering, but it also closes it because it says anything outside of that's not going to be taken into account. It's a very dangerous game. Perspectival thinking spatializes and then employs what it has spatialized. All inferences or deductions are expressed in language by spatial concepts. This is very important. So when you hear people say things like behind, take Immanuel Kant, right? The thing and of. We have the space, time, and causality as metaphysical faculties that are pre-embedded in our brains to assure that, yes, this mouse pad exists, and on a scientific level, as long as I do it right, things are going to be okay. But behind this mouse pad is the thing in and of itself, because this was constructed in the mind through the categories of space, time, and causality. Well, it raises the obvious question of how could we perceive this if we didn't have those categories? We'll never know. But the point is, when he says the thing in and of itself is quote unquote behind, that's rational thought. How do you know that's rational thought? Spatial phenomena are manifested. There's spatial terminology, and we're about to get into that. So anytime you hear space, know that this person is being rational. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be. I'll give an example after this. Language speaks of quote unquote transcending or overriding or exceeding, and philosophical thought of this kind represents, conceives of. It proves, it grasps and comprehends, it grasps conceptually, it considers, it imputes, it debates and argues. So I'm going to give a very quick example because I don't want this video to be too long. If you follow modern online political or philosophical debate, you will hear a ton of conversation, a ton of debate about moral foundations. How do you ground your foundations in morality? Okay, moral foundation. What is a foundation? Foundation is a quantifiably measurable spatialized object. Okay, it's a foundation. It is something in space. When I ground my axioms, ground is obviously a reference to space. So what they're trying to do, you can tell that they're being rational because they say things with space. They're trying to ground a foundation of their morality. And the big problem with this is that there is none. Our moral concepts are quantifiably immeasurable. They are aspatial. They are without space. So when they try to impose spatialized conceptions in this area, they can never do it. And the best chance they got is God, and you can deconstruct that too. There is no moral foundation, just like there is no moral unit in utilitarianism. It just doesn't exist. You are imposing a spatialized mode of thought in an area that is aspatial, and this is why you get ridiculous results. So every time you hear a moral debate, you're not actually listening to a debate. What you're hearing is two people bickering over their moral foundations, which don't actually exist, ever. None of them do. But in that way, we're all on the same foundation, which is kind of nice in a way, because no one has this right to go around and just impose their will on others because you've decided that your moral foundation is better. There is no moral foundation. Again, foundation is a quantifiably measurable, spatialized object. The contents of our morals cannot be tangibly grasped upon. They are not spatial. We can know their effects, but we don't really know their essence or their measurable sustenance. We can't grab them. There is no moral foundation. It's ridiculous. So much of this is just ridiculous. All right. Leisgang has observed and underscored the spatiality of our philosophical languages and thinking which, as we noted, knows only walls and selective divided language, and thinking which, as we noted, knows divided objects, having lost its binding content and self-complementarity in favor of the comprehended spatial world. Quote, philosophical language is laced with expressions which point to a visible order in a conceived space. When we speak of sub and superordination, counter and juxtaposed concepts, higher and lower types, we find that these designations are based on the conception of a spatial up and down, right and left. When Plato in the Symposium leads us up step by step to the ideas, but designates matter as the underlying, we have to visualize a vertically constructed world image and philosophical system. Kant's dualism, on the other hand, where appearances confront cognition and reason as their object, and the thing in itself is to be sought behind the appearances, that's what I was just talking about, excuse me, presupposes a horizontal arrangement of basic concepts and their content. There is surely a basic distinction between Platonic and Kantian philosophy, inasmuch as Kant's ideas no longer reside above man, but are points of orientation lying in the same plane with man. Let's see. Leisgang expands on these remarks in a quotation from Kant, which we will cite at least in part because it expresses precisely this form of thinking, which we have called perspectival thinking. The ideas have, on the other hand, an admirable and indispensable regulatory use in directing and understanding toward a particular goal, in view of which the lines of direction of all its regulations merge into one point. But this has made thinking itself spatial and static, permitting the materialization of spirit and even the spatialization of time, which, as we pointed out in Chapter 5, was once related to inceptual thinking. With this space, time, and thinking, which, as we indicated earlier in our discussion, are interrelated, are driven to their extreme formulation and valuation. To a considerable degree, they represent the exact opposite of their original situation. Indeed, they threaten to lead themselves, and this means primarily us, ad absurdum. So that's a fancy way of saying that overlying on the spatial aspects of thought, and when you apply it to areas like time or spirit where it doesn't belong, you get rationalism. When you get rationalism, you get the death of the individual and the collective and society. So awesome. So we're done with that section. I'm glad he didn't spend too long on that because we did already kind of go through this. So now we have a super interesting section we're going to be going through. It's not too long either, which is good. Called paradoxical thinking. This is good. So paradox is good. Paradox is a sign that you have transcended rationalism. When a rationalist says it doesn't make sense because it's a paradox, that's a rationalist. They've just revealed themselves to be confined to spatial limitations. That is a rationalist. We're done with that. All right. The bond which diaresis has severed, a bond which man dispenses with only at the peril of denying a part of himself, the irrational, cannot be restored either by pyramidal or even less by perspectival thought. So perspectival thought, rational thought, subordinated. It tried to supplant irrational thought. But in doing so, it denied irrational thought as a respected or an aspect of the human condition that is worthy of respect in its own right, has its own efficient and deficient aspects, and that can enrich our lives. Rationality says no, it's not measurable, so I'm not going to do it. In trying to reactivate and reattain the benefits of efficient irrationality, it's never going to happen through this perspectival or even pyramidal thinking. It's just not going to happen. It's got to go through integral consciousness, not this ridiculous rational stuff. Yet it is possible to propose a previously unrecognized form of thought that reveals the covalidity of the irrational in a form reminiscent of a rational mode of formulation. So that's what paradoxical thought is. I'm going to repeat for emphasis. That's what we're doing. Yet it is possible to propose a previously unrecognized form of thought that reveals the covalidity of the irrational in a form reminiscent of a rational mode of formulation. So integral, it balances rational with irrational, and we're about to see how that is expressed in paradox. Brilliant stuff. We have called this thought form the paradoxical and described paradoxical statement as the preeminent form of religious utterance. That's another thing. Religious utterance, you will see paradox a lot. And he mentions Jesus had a couple sayings that were paradox. I think the Bhagavad Gita, I think, has a bunch of paradox in as well. It's got a bunch of oceanic thinking. So from the mental point of view, paradoxical thinking actually establishes the bond or religio to the irrationality and pre-rationality of the mythic and magic structures. It is a form that mediates between oceanic and perspectival thinking. It is a form that mediates between oceanic, last week, and perspectival thinking, what we just went over, and contains both rational and irrational elements. So you can see how paradox is integral, because instead of privileging rational over irrational, or going the other way and privileging irrational over rational, which is what the deficient romantics want us to do, they want to drive us off the cliff that way. No, it just balances them into one. It's beautiful. A good example of paradoxical expression is the well-known statement of Pascal: "You would not seek me if you had not found me." Now, of course, you seek someone first, and then you find them, right? So when I'm playing hide and seek with my little nephews, they hide, I seek them, and then I find them. Finding comes after seeking, right? But here he says, "You would not seek me if you had not found me." So there's a temporal one, then the other. And he switches this. He goes, "No, you found me first, and that's why you sought me." Rationally speaking, this does not make sense. Rationally speaking, this is a blatant contradiction. This is paradoxical thinking. This statement contains the very elements we have mentioned. It employs the if and hence draws an inference, which shows that it belongs to mental thinking. So we have, of course, "You would not seek me if you had not found me." That's mental thinking. At the same time, it contains a psychic reversal, since in rational terms, the second part is not a result of the first, but rather the opposite, which is, of course, the switching from seeking and then finding, from finding and then seeking. So we clearly see how paradox represents a respect between rational and irrational. Beautiful. Oh, this is interesting. This can be illustrated on a geometric thesis known as the axiom of parallels. It states that the two parallel lines intersect at infinity. This can be shown in graphic form by crossing two lines at acute angles. The chi, or x, mentioned in Plato's Timaeus, is suggestive of this configuration. In the chi, or x, formed by these intersecting parallels, the perspectival vanishing point is neutralized. The elongated lines of the lower triangle of vision form a mirror triangle to the original one. Whatever lies beyond, in quotes, the spatial perspectival point in infinity, that is, in the immeasurable, verifies in its reverse image what is posited in rational terms as a result. Now, I want you to tell me if you understood that. This took me like 3 hours to understand. It was very frustrating. So check this out. So remember, obviously, we have the triangle. So we have, "You would not seek me if you had not sought me," right? This is just kind of basic. "You would not seek me if you had not sought me." It's almost like a truth of reason, just like you're repeating yourself, a tautology. And then we have, "You would not find me if you had not found me." That's B. So the first one was A. "You would not find me if you had not found me." That's B. So we can see the triangle here. We have A and B. That's the triangle. That's the formula for, of course, the mental structure. But with paradox, the triangle becomes neutralized, right? Or I should say the vanishing point becomes neutralized. I'm sorry if you can't see it too well. I do apologize. But you can see, once that first triangle is formed, a second mirror triangle is formed, and we switch from A to B. We switch from left to right and right to left. So this is the balance between irrational and rational. And we can also see how paradox transcends the vanishing point, because the vanishing point is the necessary point of the triangle, the invisible and inferred point that confers order on what is encompassed visually or by thought. But in paradox, the vanishing point is neutralized because we still retain that triangular essence, but we don't have that conferred order in a rational sense because we've switched from left to right and right to left. Very interesting. Very interesting. Very interesting. So we can see The mirror triangle there clearly shows the transcendence of the classic stable triangle of the mental structure. In other words, a statement of irrational character in the rational sphere has in the irrational structure a rational character, that is, quote unquote, beyond and on the other side of the point behind the spatializing horizon. This reestablishes in an unusually clever and effective manner the bond or religio to the past. So you can, again, I just want to show you this again because it took me a real long time to get to understand this, but we can see the A and A. We have, you would not seek me, A, if you had not sought me, A. And then that's combined with this triangle. You would not seek me if you had not found me. And then you would not find me if you had not sought me. So you can very clearly see, and then this vanishing point, as I mentioned, is neutralized because it's not conferring order in that same rational way. The only order it's conferring is this sort of mirror-like paradox. Interesting, huh? Very interesting. As befits its religious character, this form of thinking is found primarily in religious authors of the mental consciousness structure, notably hymnists such as Simeon. Yet it can also be found even among rationalists, as for instance in Aristotle's statement about the unmoved mover, right down to, or up to, the core statement of present-day nuclear physics regarding the polarity inherent in the complementarity principle. So that's what I was saying. You see this a lot in science. Science seems to be better than us in this, and better than us philosophers, because science, I'm willing to bet a lot of them look at something and they go, oh, that's a paradox. That doesn't make sense. We're just going to start over. I'm willing to bet there are those out there, but I'm willing to also bet there are a lot of other people who are just like, no, it's a paradox, and we're going to continue this way because you're yesterday's news. This form of thought even re-emerges now and then in its deficient form as witty psychic reflections, as in the paradoxical style of Oscar Wilde, whose genuine religiosity is first evident in De Profundis. Or it is also suggested by statement of a mythical character such as the silent music of Spanish mystic St. John of the Cross. It is, moreover, commensurate with the rational structure. It is a synthesis or compromise, or third form of thought in which there is a consistently unsatisfactory effort to unify opposites. Interesting. We can further clarify the state of affairs if we consider that parallels intersect at infinity only if their path is curved. This implies that there is at least a tendency towards circularity inherent in them, although the point of intersection also gives them the character of a triangle. So we're seeing how we just said the circularity, which is of course characteristic of oceanic mythical thought, if you want to call it that, but also the point of intersection between the rational and the irrational provides, what does he say, gives them a character of a triangle. So we're seeing this very odd mix between the 2D circle and the triangle. Of course, there's a combination of the two preceding symbols, and there we go. In this respect, paradox represents on the one hand a deficient form of symbol, and thus oceanic thinking, while on the other it is a kind of mentalistic or intellectualized religio, for only a purely rational statement is absolute, that is disunited and consequently cut off from religion. In any event, paradoxical thinking is a form deserving of further consideration. This is not to advocate it or give it a preference in any way. We are simply ascertaining a fact. But there is an, my favorite word, guys. You guys know I struggle with this one. But there is an apocryphal. Was that right? Apocryphal. Apocryphal. That's going to be my new rap name. Yo, it's apocryphal on the beat. Can't say no to the beat, guys. This is my song Paradox off the album Kill All Rationalists. Apocryphal saying of Christ. If you do not change low to high, left to right, to back to front, you shall not enter my kingdom. So remember, paradox is the preeminent religious utterance that reveals the covalidity of irrational and rational. We can see that in that statement of Christ. If you do not change low to high, left to right, back to front, you will not enter the kingdom. That's what we're doing with paradox. If we can clearly perceive what paradoxical utterance actually represents, contains, and realizes, as in the picture of the intersecting parallels, where even the intersecting or severing is not negative and is thus itself a paradox, We can in part perceive what is expressed by the apocryphal saying with its relation to the whole. There is at the very least a valid left-right shift or substitution in paradoxical statement which, inasmuch as we are dealing with a thinking process, still occurs primarily in our conceptualization. So paradox is a sign that we have transcended the triangle, the deficient triangle of rationality. It is a more integral mode of thought that integrates rational and irrational rather than privileging the rational over the irrational. Let's see. Okay, so this shift from left to right, okay, has been underway in various areas now for a considerable time, roughly 150 years. Now remember, if we're shifting from left to right and right to left, and that's coming off the back of the perspectival phase, which is ancient Greeks and the Renaissance. And what does rationality privilege? It posits right and it posits left. What does rationality privilege over the other? It will, of course, privilege the right over the left. Not only because since ancient times, mythically, the right has always been consciously awakening, ego-driven order, clarity, thought, stuff like that. That is to say, the home turf of rational thought. But the left-hand side, that's all emotion, that's all unconscious stuff. That's got to go. That's got to go. You also see this, of course, as we talked about in the mental. Back in one of my first videos in the series, we talk about the rights. People have rights. You are right and you are correct. We can see the overemphasis on the right. We saw that in the mental thinking or in the mental consciousness structure video. Go rewatch that if you need a reminder. But it posits left, it posits right, invokes a third act, and it privileges the right over the left. And you see this a lot in politics, and we're going to get to that. We would like first to point to 4 such inceptions which can be recognized in totally separate areas of our lives or civilization in the political, social, scientific, and artistic sphere. So what's happening? Again, in the perspectival age, the age of rationality, the Enlightenment, all that stuff, we over one-sided emphasized the right way, the logical, rational, ordered, male, masculine way of doing things. Integral consciousness and paradox switches from left to right and right to left. So if the right has been privileged, if we're switching from left to right, we will be privileging the left. And the left, though politically that is part of it, it is also more than just politics. So I'm going to make some points at the end. This is the most obvious example in my personal opinion. In the political sphere, it is the rise of the left that not only demands to a great extension the position of the right, but is already usurping it. The expression the left, as applied to the mass movements of the underprivileged, and the fact that we speak of the awakening left indicate the kind of process involved here. Awakening left, the left is coming up. The left, as a party, establishes itself precisely when the previously suppressed left aspect, which we today also call the unconscious, first surfaces in the earliest psychologizing writings of Stendhal and Leopardi. During the first 3 decades of the 19th century, the originally liberal party is assigned to the left side in the French Parliament. Surely a profoundly significant placement or pausing. So ever since, let's say, early 1800s, the left, obviously with an allusion towards Karl Marx, has gone up. It's been ascending in terms of popularity and power. Let's see what else we got. This is at the exact same time when in the world of psychology, the previously suppressed unconscious aspects are finally coming back into psychological advancements and insights. So 2 things have happened here. Since the 1500s, the right, the political right, that is, with all their order and all their logic and all their empirical facts and all that stuff, remember Ben Shapiro, facts don't care about your feelings, that has been privileged. That has been privileged. So the right, and Derrida would go on to notice this as well, since the mental conscious structure, the political right has been privileged over the political left. So, of course, now we're seeing all that left-wing stuff come back with the fury. Now, that could be 2 things. That could be, and actually I'd say it is 2 things. On one hand, we have Logic, order, clarity, all that stuff, that's been privileged over emotion, feeling, intuition, all the stuff of the left, all the stuff that drives the left. Like I said, feeling, emotion, moral drive to do good, a desire for helping everyone, helping the downtrodden, all that stuff. So that's been suppressed. And now that deficient rationalism has come about, it's reactivated those deficient mythical and magical stuff. And now you're seeing a rise of the left, right? So we see this obviously in woke politics. Also, compounded by this, is the right has been privileged, is the rise of the integral structure, which switches from left to right. So on one hand, we have suppressed feelings that are coming back with a vengeance because the rationalism that was deployed to control these feelings has proven deficient. So now they're coming back with a bang, compounded by the rise of integral consciousness, which switches from left to right and right to left. This placement, like all expressions connected with the political left, represents the masses, the suppressed awakening movement. Now, of course, why is it the masses? Because in the mental consciousness structure, of course, we individual, collective. Invoke the third aspect of measuring thought. We privilege the individual. We see this represented in individual rights and our general libertarian individualist attitude in America. Why is all of a sudden we keep seeing all this communism and all this collectivism and all this mass stuff and all this anti-individual stuff? The left is coming back because of deficient rationalism and compounded by integral consciousness. Awakening movement, or the process of the awakening consciousness of a significant part of mankind in quantitative terms. It is an awakening which strives to equalize left and right, at first under the negative sign of a class conflict. Magic attempts at uniformity and the deficiently tinged magical claim to power, or the deficiently mythical wish for power. So this is obviously an allusion to communism, where everyone must be uniform, everyone must be one, everyone must subsume themselves and lose themselves into the mass, and we must have power, and we must impose it over those dirty capitals. And because of its irrational source, it's a process which evoked anxiety among its supporters who sought safety in an extremely rationalistic, that is, specifically materialistic doctrine. So the communists are rejecting rationalism. They say, no, we don't like your sterile, cold, logical world. It suppresses us. It limits our feelings. It limits our powers. It limits our romanticism. Great. The problem is they haven't transcended. They've just gone the other way. So now we're going into a political position, a political school of thought that has, I agree with this, but Gebser is also saying this, irrational origins, and they are deploying irrationality in an area, the world, and organizing the political world where we should be rational, or at the very least somewhat rational. But they don't do that. I would love to one day I'm going to be doing videos about communism and economics. It's just so delusional. It's just beyond. It's just ridiculous. So as we can see here, though, actually, and we'll continue. The doctrine spared the left from chaos, but not everyone else, excuse me. The left, too, if it does not come to its senses, will succumb to the chaos it brought to light just as much as its enemies bound to it in opposition, particularly as the left threatens to deteriorate into a rigid fanaticism. So does that sound familiar to any of you people? Does that sound familiar? People on the left who have rigid fanaticism, who are hyper irrational, and they will springboard off that irrational to punish you for daring to disagree with their absurd nonsense. That is the woke left. Gebser predicted the rise of the woke left, and he condemns the rise of the woke left. So if you're in that group, Gebser doesn't like you, and neither do I. You're a cool person, but I disagree. Here's another point I wanted to mention. It is an awakening which strives to equalize left and right. So much of American politics is dominated by discourse of equality. Now, of course, the modern classic traditional understanding of equality in America was equality of opportunity, right? Which necessarily means you will have an inequality of outcomes. Why? Because we are all of different capabilities. We do not all have the same capabilities, and we don't all have them at the same time. I can't sing like Adele, play basketball like Michael Jordan, play piano like Vera Wang or whatever the hell her name is, and do science like Stephen Hawking. It's just not going to happen. Some people have different qualities. They have different skills. They grew up in different environments. All this stuff is a factor. Okay, there's so many factors that account for disparities, people. It's not just racism, right? It's ridiculous. We are unequal, and if you give us an equal test, you will see unequal outcomes because the unequal outcomes are just a codification of our unequal aspect. Why in the world would you expect equal outputs when you have unequal inputs? It's so dumb. But notice how equality, thanks to the far left and the woke left and the communists, has changed. No longer is it the reasonable, understandable understanding of equality, the one that's consistent throughout our species' entire history. No, now it's equality of results. Now it's equity. What is equity? Equity is nothing if not an equalization of outcomes between left and right. So they say, you succeeded, you got an 88% on whatever, or you made $88,000. This person made $44,000. You must equal. So now we're going to drop 22,000 from you and give 22,000 to them. You can see, of course, this is irrational nonsense. Not only is it irrational nonsense, I would argue it's immoral. But the point is, you're seeing this intensity of equalization. The left wants equalization. The left feels that they have been marginalized. They haven't been given the opportunities to succeed because the world we've constructed is too rational, I guess. God forbid. So they want equalization. Everything is about equality. Everything is about equality. All groups must be equal. It's just insane. I don't want to make this too like he brought it up, so I'm kind of going on a rant. But the discourse around equality has just gotten so stupid and so ridiculous. And the reason why is because it's been intensified by either deficient mythical or magical stuff, or a deficient irrational integral structure, which is just emerging, but because they don't know what's going on, they just are kind of succumb to its worst aspects. So yeah, again, Gebser predicted the rise of the woke left, and he condemns it, and I thought that was very interesting. Okay. In any event, the presence of the left mirrors an inception of a left-right shift, even if at first negatively, which will be genuine only if an integration and not merely a change of place occurs. And this refers to the integration of mankind. Now, here's the big problem, and I will admit this is my own biases coming in here. Unfortunately, if the right has been privileged in politics, we'll say, you can complain about that. And I would complain about that to an extent, even though I would consider myself a member on the right. There's a lot of idiots on the right, and please don't lump me in with them. Having said that, with all the critiques of rationalism, with all the critiques of liberalism, I think we need to come back into the real world a little bit and recognize, hey, I'm on a computer talking to you guys. I have all this wealth, I have all this technology, I've got all this great stuff. I have life-saving medicine. I've got rights, and people can't just come in and decapitate my mom or my girlfriend, and they're just not going to face any justice for it. I can defend myself. I've got all this great stuff. So when the right was in charge, though imperfect, they did create a country that millions, in a very real way, not just some abstract story, in a very real external way, risk their lives and their families' lives, their children's lives, to come over here to escape the horrors of the deficient aspects of the mythical and magical structures that are manifest in other countries, Timbuktu, China, all this crazy stuff. So say what you will about the US, and it is certainly far from perfect, but we're doing okay. Not only that, I would argue we have extreme moral improvement. So my point is saying when the right constructed the thing, though imperfect, it was still pretty good on the whole. And I don't think people quite appreciate that to an extent. Here's the problem. If we're switching from right to left and left to right, that sort of implies that the left is not going to take over. The left has never, ever, 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 ever been shown that they have ever once been able to construct, if you will, a prosperous, functioning, morally virtuous society ever. I'm not talking exclusively just about the far left. That's obvious. Communism will never work. Anarchism will never work. All this anarcho-syndicalism, anarcho-Bidenism, socialism, whatever word you want to describe, okay, it will never work ever. And we can talk about the theory all day. We can look at the empirical testing of your theories. It will not work. I just don't know what to say. It just doesn't. And the reason why is because they're deploying the unperspectival world, the mythical, magical world, in areas where we should be rational. That's why it will never work. All left stuff is very irrational, all emotionally driven, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but they take it too far. Now, this will be a slightly more controversial statement. I don't think even the center left has been able to show that they can structure a functioning, virtuous, prosperous society. Even I'm not talking your far left, woke, tanky commies. I'm talking your liberal Democrat voters like, you know, Hillary Clinton supporters, or just maybe Biden supporters, but they don't agree with like this woke stuff, like this Mark stuff. I have yet to hear a SOCDEM, a social democrat, if you will, that has yet to offer a solution other than just having the government come in and just figure it all out, because that's how it works. Uh, Everything they do, they point out these problems. A lot of the times they don't realize that scarcity exists, trade-offs exist. They don't care, but they're emotionally driven. They don't care about any of that stuff. And they just go, oh, the government can come in and just fix the problem, solve the problem. Of course, they don't realize they're creating more problems in the form of trade-offs, because the government requires taxes, and that tax money can be used for families to pay their bills and all this stuff. So they just, if someone can point to me to a SOCDEM whose solution to a problem isn't the government coming in and fixing it, I would love to hear it. I would love to hear it. I've never met one, not one. Every single time it's always raise taxes, raise the minimum wage, bring the government in, and just do all these ridiculous artificial injections in the economy and politics that just ruin everything. So unfortunately, in Integral, when we're shifting from left to right and right to left, we have to be punished by the incompetence of the left. In my person, now again, this is all just my personal opinion. Please feel free to disagree. Write in the comments. All good, all good. We're cool. We're all good. I'm not going to accuse you of being evil or anything like that. It's just my personal opinion. So interesting stuff. I'm sorry to go on a little bit of a rant there, but I do think it was somewhat relevant. And again, the whole point of this series is we're supposed to be making connections to the real world, or else what's the point? So it's very interesting. So if you've noticed why the woke left or the far left seems to have this new intensity, this sort of frothing at the mouth emotional drive to them for power, that's why. Deficient rationalism, which privileged rational individualism at the expense of the left's collectivist irrationality. So that's coming back up, and then this is compounded by a new intensity of emerging integral structure. Sorry for going on such a soliloquy there, but it's interesting. Okay, but remember, the rise of the left in integral consciousness is not just constrained to the political. There's also other aspects. From a sociological standpoint, the inceptual shift is manifest since 1792 in the negative form of the one-sided demand of the woman's question, so of course feminism. The implications affect not only the social position of women, but that of men as well. Since the feminine from time immemorial has been identified with the left, again, the right was privileged in the mental structure, and the left is feminine and female stuff, well, of course, women didn't have the same rights as men. That was another good point. Women didn't have the same rights as men. They didn't have the same privileges as men. That's mental structure. It's one-sided, and it privileged the masculine. As long as women have only a one-sided striving after the rights of men, without granting them their lefts, in a manner of speaking, this inception of a left-right shift will remain negative. So this is the problem with the feminists, and in turn the problem with their counterpart, the red pill manosphere, if you want to call them that, the Andrew Tates of the world. So what they've done is they both have created each other. They both started with a grain of truth, springboarded off that truth into create a victim narrative, and then use that victim narrative to engage in special pleading. The problem when you do that is you've taken a polar complement, and some people seriously try to disagree with this. They're morons. Men and women are a polar complement. We see this obviously in that both are required to bring new life, obviously, and there are other aspects, but the yin and the yang, the black and white and black. Now on the white side, you have a little black dot, right? On the black side, you have a little white dot. Well, in man and women, you have the anima and animus, right? In man, you have that internalized feminine aspect, and in the woman, you have an internalized masculine aspect. So the polar complementarity is really clear here. We both need each other. We should both love and respect each other. So the mental consciousness structure, again, privileged masculine. So that created the feminist. The feminist, we took the polar complement, we did the seesaw, pulled down on one on the other. The feminists started doing things that, of course, affected their standing, but because they're polar complements, and when you affect one, you affect the other, now you've affected the status of men. So now we're going to pull down again, and now through hundreds of years, we have feminists versus men's rights, feminists versus the red pill, feminists versus the manosphere, and we get all this ridiculous nonsense where people in my generation, people in my age or younger, seriously have like a vile and vicious hatred of women. They've had one girlfriend and they got broken up with, probably because they weren't a young Brad Pitt or they weren't this perfect thing. And they go to these guys who just feed them all these stories of all these women acting terribly. It's terrible. And then of course with the feminists, you say all men are trash, men are evil, men are the reason for slavery and all. I've heard feminists say that literally all evil from the world comes from men. And now again, like I said, on the other side, you get this whining and totally wimpy, my girlfriend left me. All girls are just gold digging money seekers and they're just going to love you and leave you. It's okay. All right. This is very healthy, everyone. This is a very healthy society we're getting into. Okay. Only when the one-sided will to displace one part of humanity and the demand for equal rights are abandoned in favor of an integration will the human be able to emerge. Just as matriarchy was once displaced by the patriarchy still in force today, so too can this patriarchy be dissolved in turn by the integrum, where neither mater, mother, nor pater, father, but the human being in both will prevail, a human being integrated by man and woman who will then have acceptance and worth. So no longer are we just focusing on your sex, no longer are we focusing on your genitals, we're focusing on the man, which is, say, the human aspect of both men and women. That's more important, it's more spiritually sound, and it's more conducive to a better world. And we can finally go back to loving each other instead of this ridiculous I don't need you and I don't need you in my life. A man doesn't need a woman doesn't need that. That's bullshit. Bullshit. I don't know what to say. Now, another example of the left rising. In the scientific sphere, the tendency towards a shift is manifest in the efforts of psychoanalysis and analytical psychology. So with Freud and Jung, we see the left. We have the magic structure with Freud, of course, and the mythical structure with Jung. This is all unconscious stuff. Obviously, that was rising in the early 20th century, at the same time as all these other aspects were rising, right? These endeavors, too, are the only inceptions which are still pervaded by a rationalistic dualism, and which are for that reason still unaware of the partially magic Freud and partially mythical Jung conditionalities and limitations. As a consequence of this failure to recognize its own roots, much that sails or swims under the name of psychology is a lesser but nevertheless destructive demonology, for as long as phenomena remain unintelligible and unrecognized, their effect on us today will be destructive. So because all the psychoanalysis don't really have an understanding of this stuff, I have no idea why. They're just kind of doing nothing. Like psycho is just all this psycho is just a waste of time. Like tell me the roots. Is this magic structure stuff? Is this mythical structure stuff or what? Because if you don't know that, then you can't provide me any sort of real solution that's going to help me. If you identify all these magic consciousness structure problems and you keep giving me these rational solutions, we're going to have a problem here. Yet despite all kinds of erroneous attempts and results, this does represent an inception of a left-right shift, however dubious, that dates back to the statement of the concept of an unconscious toward the end of the 18th century. And finally, let us mention in passing one of the many inceptions visible in the artistic sphere. So far as we are able to judge the situation, these artistic inceptions are the only ones which cannot be evaluated either in a positive or in a negative sense, because they are already integral. For this reason, they will be discussed in detail in Part 2. We refer, among others things, to a style of representation in modern painting, particularly following Picasso and Braque. If you look up Picasso's work, that's integral, baby, and you will be able to understand why. Excuse me. And which definitely left values, as we would call them, symbolized by a skull and similar things, are for the first time depicted on the right side of the canvas or picture. We'll skip a paragraph here. He says, the actual effectuality of the apocryphal words of Jesus does not take place in the conceptual and representational spatio-temporal world, nor in the two-dimensional, nor in the one-dimensional world. Only where the world is space-free and time-free, where the wearing gains validity, wearing of truth, that'll be in the second part, where the world and we ourselves, the whole, become transparent, and where the diaphanous and what is rendered diaphanous become the volition of the world, does the world become concrete and integral. And that, my friend, will be the last paragraph in this section. I apologize if I stumbled over my words there a little bit. I'm a bit of a moron. So we don't get too concerned. We're not done with the previous forms of realization of thought. That'll be expanded on more in the second book. Now, in the next video, I think I'm just going to do, we only have one more section, then we're officially done part one, and the section we have is basically just a summary and an outline for what's to come, so it won't be too long. Maybe I'll do that later this week. I love you guys. Hope you guys learned something, and let me know what you guys think in the comments. I want to thank you guys so much for continuing to watch. I know it's a big commitment, and I really do appreciate you guys watching it. It really just means the world to me. So thank you guys so much again, and I will see you soon. I love you guys.